about Latty and Jackson Township, these two. And as we look at these two areas, we see that there's, let me see, we did Grover Hill, so we're not going to do that one. We're going to do Latty itself, Broughton, Hedges. What else do we have here in Latty, in Jackson Township?
Hedges and Broughton are your two little towns in Jackson. And Paulding Township, you have Briceton, Briceton, and Latty.
Okay. I was trying to find Latty on the map
You
here.
have little ones.
You were in Latty Township, I think.
I'm in Latty Township, that's the problem.
In Jackson Township.
Follow the railroad.
Right here we are. All right. I was wrong with it. Paulding Township and Jackson Township. And this is Latty right here. I was lost there for a minute. I thought, where in the world's Latty?
That's what a lot of people ask me. When I go to Tennessee and wherever, well, where in the world is Latty?
I get asked all the time, even when I go down to the state library, where is Paulding? You know, and I think in 1990, the population of Jackson Township, that'll be this right here, was 1,821. They list Broughton as 151 people. And in Paulding Township, we had 3,978. And in the village of Latty, 205. Now, of course, we find in Jackson Township and Paulding Township, Paulding is included, our village of Paulding. And in Paulding Township, Paulding has 2,476 people, but in Jackson Township, there's 129, so it just sort of spreads over a little bit into Jackson Township. Well, today, I can see that we've got a lot of people here who are very knowledgeable, and I think this will probably be one of our best meetings. We have Latty's represented by the Phillips, and you're going to talk about
Latty, Briceton.
Latty and Briceton, and your name is
Del Baxter.
Baxter. Okay, well, sure. And Dorothy Chester,
I'll take Broughton.
Broughton.
And son of Jackson.
And Ruth Alice is going to Briceton.
And then mother from Paulding Township.
And are you visiting today?
No.
Are you going to be knowledgeable?
A little bit about Paulding.
A little bit about Paulding.
Jackson Township.
All right. And Norm Roman
I'll be for Paulding.
for Paulding. Well, see, boy, we've got good representation here of these two counties, and I think everything's going to turn out.
I can't get Ruth at all in the picture.
Can't get Ruth Alice?
Can she move her chair one way or the other? That's okay. You can.
That's okay, yeah.
That's okay. You can stay up there. If she just moves her chair one way or the other.
They want to see you there.
No,
Yeah, they want to see you there. Yeah, that's better. No.
He thinks he was in the limelight last week. He thinks he could have.
Yeah, that's right.
I didn't move from beside you in pictures.
He just leaves you out there by yourself, doesn't he? Maybe we could just take this and make one big circle, rather.
Yes.
Would that work out?
Yes,
well,
that would
huh?
work out. Yes.
All right, then everyone will get their little nose in here. We don't want to cut noses off. Any of you have pictures you want to show, because we can view those. All right. Now what we'll have you do is introduce yourself and tell what part of Paulding or Jackson Township you're going to be talking about. And if you want to get up and point to anything on the map, you're welcome to do that.
I'm not very good at this public speaking. I hope you're not recording here at this time.
We're going to start recording real soon.
Okay. I was born just south and half mile east of, or west of Latty. Lived there for 3 years, and then I moved out of the territory for 5 years and came back. Went to school at Latty starting in the 3rd grade. And that was before they had a gymnasium. The gymnasium was added later. And we lived a mile and a quarter west of Latty. And at that time, out where we lived, there was 3 ponds. There was previously 2 tile and brick mills, one on the north side of the road and one on the south side of the road, owned by the Baileys. And they had made these 3 ponds, and what I remember about them was the ice skating before the gymnasium. One night, we estimated there was around 200 kids out there on the ponds ice skating. And one of the Neil boys, the oldest one, got the idea that he had a Model T Ford and it'd be fun to take it out on the ice. And he was having a great time sliding around on the ice. Grimshaw boys decided they were having so much fun, they'd like to have a little fun too, so they took their big Buick out. It got out about 20 feet and went through the ice. Of course, it was only about a foot deep. And about 10 o'clock at night, Dad had to get the horses out and pull the car off of it. When the gymnasium came, the ice skating stopped. There wasn't much that was done after that. But I can remember Frank Freeze was a native of Latty, and one of the early ones. I can remember him coming in and saying that there was nothing but woods around Latty when he first came there, and there were bear in the woods that you could hunt for. He had a brother John who was a watch repairman, and John also played the violin. One of the remarks he used to make, he'd ask him to play a violin. He said, "Well, can't play much, play a little. Now you play a little." And he presents the violin to you. It seemed in those days you could always find a group of people around that were musically inclined and knew how to play certain instruments. His brother-in-law, Joe Bayshore, lived across the road from us at a mile and a quarter west of Latty. And in the evening, I could still remember him take his chair out on the porch and lean back against the wall and have his pipe in his mouth and start playing the violin. I could hear it from our place.
Those days are past, aren't they? You just don't hear that anymore.
Oh, yeah. And you could always get a band up for a dance. Of course, the Briceton band was very well known and went on for years. I have a picture somewhere in here where they were marching on the road. At that time, Walter Ryder, he must have been about the first director. Later on, they had directors from someplace else that I didn't recognize. I can remember my father telling about him anyhow. The oldest building that I know of in Latty is the one on the Urban Store property. It's an old barn back of where Mrs. Urban Store's house. And when Irvin was still living, he told me one time that as far as he knew, that was the oldest building in Latty. Well, the Cincinnati Northern used to go through Latty, and of course Norm would know about that. Got down to a one-car passenger train. What did they call it?
We call it the doodle bus.
The doodle bus. I'd forgotten what it was. I still remember seeing it go through Latty. Also, there was a huckster originated in the Latty from the Meeson Kenny store, grocery store. And that run up there into the 1930s, late 30s. They had that huckster out. So they would load this truck up with groceries and stop at all the houses along the way, selling groceries. One of the last drivers of that truck that I remember, I think, was Frank Cruz. He lives in Fort Wayne at this time. Next to the old grocery store, this East Kenny grocery store, was the village repair shop. I think originally it was blacksmith shop. But L.G. Toper in that for quite some time. And next to that, we used to have a restaurant, the Burgesses. I believe we're about the last ones that run the restaurant in Latty. And next to that was the Lloyd Vocal store, which at one time was a general store and post office. And the post office, and later was taken out of that store, moved to the house next door. I believe it was next door anyhow, and Bob Leslie ran that, and he also had a barber shop in that place. And then next, pretty close to that, was the nice house that Don Siv now lives in. Generally, the people that occupied that run a grocery store, a larger grocery store across the street south. And that house, this general store, and the top part of it was the Knights of Pythias Lodge. I believe I might on that. And across the west of that were several stores that I can remember, mostly occupied as places to store things, except that there was a barber shop in there for a while. This was before Bob was on the other, Bob Leslie was on the other side. Leslie and Erickson ran the barber shop, and right in front of that was the Old Town Pump. You'd always go there and get a drink of water. Back by the crossing of the railroad, there was always a depot there with a hotel on the southwest corner. On the northeast corner, several buildings in there. I don't know what they originally were used for. I do know that there was a car repair shop in there for a while. And Latty also had a alfalfa mill. I believe that building is still standing back on the south side of the Norfolk from western, Norfolk southern railroad right now. Most of the woods that I can remember are still there. The woods around that. I don't know that too much of it has been taken down. Cut down. And as far as personalities are concerned, there's quite a few doctors came from Latty. Mausers. Bob Manuel, who is still, I believe, lives in Columbus.
But Dr. Harley Manley came before him.
And he followed his uncle, his Uncle Harley. And of course, one of the racehorse men, Bernie Davis, who had some very fast horses. I don't know, he came out with a state champion racehorse, I believe, at some time or other.
Is that the one that was called the Paulding Boy? I
Oh,
read in some, all
that could have been, I don't know.
all the races.
Might have been hard.
I think the lads had horses too.
Harness.
harness races. I think one of those were the cow over there, whatever, here.
That's about all that I can remember right now.
No, this is Dr. Harley Mandel's thing, but I didn't want to see it.
Well, let's have Mildred Phillips tell more about Latty. And I was reading some interesting things about your family, the land that you're living on right now, and how they.
And
That's not important. I think it dates you back, your family back quite a ways to Paulding County. That's important.
yeah, that is true.
Yeah.
Well, let me see, I'm Mildred Phillips, and I have been in Latty for the last 73 years. In fact, all my life in this house that I'm living in now, except I can remember, I was talking to my brother before I left, and he said he was 10. When my house that I'm living in used to set back where my pond is now. And I can remember this Mr. George Parent, I believe.
Moved house.
Yeah, he moved houses, and he moved our house. And what I can remember of it is those horses going round and round and seeing our house come up. And we kids had to stay next door, who was my sister. So that was, long ago. But I have seen many, many changes in Latty, and I just want to share that this is a book that this lady right here and myself wrote when Latty was 100 years old, which was in 1881, I believe, that Latty was, or 82, one of the other places. 81 or 82, Latty was established and became a town. There was a Mr. Latty and a Mr. Wrexham Lewis. And part of Latty was called Wrexham. All of Latty was called Wrexham at one time. Then it changed now until it's Latty. And there was a bargain between Mr. Latty that if that territory ever changed its name back, that he would take the land back again. Oh, let me see. I don't really know what you want to know, Delbert. You covered it very well. Latty used to be almost all woods. And that was the Latty people's livelihood. Many, many people worked at the stave factories and there were several factories in Latty. Several factories. And no one would believe that now, but that is true. You might want to remember that most of Latty has been destroyed by fires. Every time a building burned, it was a fire. I'm sure that you remember how Latty was laid out. As far as I can remember, we're going to start up by the old store, what we call the old big store. And of course, like you said, the owners of that store usually live across the street. And as far as I can go back, which isn't, too far, according to this book, I think it was a Mr. Struthers, I think, or however you pronounce it.
Strouber.
Well, S-T-R-O.
U-G-H. Strouber.
Yeah, well, whatever. I can remember that.
The two brothers.
And yes, it was two brothers, and that's right, you can help me. And they run that big store. We always call that the big store. It was a place where, in those days, people charged groceries, which seems so funny to me now, but I can remember that my mom and dad would charge their groceries until the chickens laid or until the cows gave the milk and the cream, and then every week, I guess it was, Mom would go up and pay her grocery bill. And of course, you could get lots of stuff in that store. It just had most anything that you wanted in there. So I remember that clear on down to McDougal, Genevieve McDougal, I think, was the last one to have ownership in that store. And then we'll skip over to, of course, you told about the garages and the meat store and the Burgess store. And I guess at one time the post office was on the south side of the street. Now, I do not remember that, but I read in here where that the post office at one time was on the south side of the street. But all I can remember is the Lloyd Vogel store. That's where the post office was. That's where Ralph Dunstan was a rural mail carrier. And that's where the switch came between Ralph and Lloyd Vogel and their wives. But we'll just let that rest. Then I remember then when, now Lloyd had a little junkie store in there too, but he had the post office. Then we moved on down to the post office that you spoke of, which was run by Bob Leslie. And now, of course, we have the little brick post office that is owned by just people, not government. That struck me as being odd. Those little post offices all around in Grover Hill and wherever.
Yeah, they lease those for
They're not.
so many years.
Yeah, 5 years, I think it's said somewhere. But that struck me as being very odd. But I must tell maybe about the old hotel, as all of us probably remember, which was called at the very first the Didier House. And you could rent a room in there for $1.40. $1.40. I thought that was interesting. We had, of course, livery stables, and I don't even know what that was, but I know we had livery stables. Anybody know what a livery stable is? You can say that, because that's... That I don't know about.
You rent cars, you rent horses.
You rented horses?
Horse and buggy.
Wagon, whatever you want.
Oh, okay. All right. I never rode in a horse and buggy, so that must strike that out. And of course, that was called the Latty Tavern at the last. But we know that Maud Smeltzer Tennyson came down through there, and I used to work for Maud. She would have me to come up there, and I would maybe scrub the porch, and you see how big this porch was. And she talked through her nose. And she always said, Mildred, come on up and scrub my porch, and I'll give you a nickel. So that's what I did. And then I would go gather greens, dandelions for her down the railroad track. Those were the fun days. Then next to there was Tony Roos's ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
And of course that was a grocery store too at some time. But I distinctly remember Tony's ice cream parlor because we had to go to church. That you had to do. But then after you went to church, Mom would always give us a nickel, or we hardly ever got over a dime. And we would go to Tony's, and all of us would eat ice cream. So that was fun. Now, of course, we had 2 railroads that ran through Latty. He has touched on the railroads, so, but I can remember the little doodle bug that ran on the Cincinnati Northern, and we could get on that thing and either go to Paulding.
20 cents.
Yeah, but I mean, we never got to Cincinnati or Van Wert.
Yeah.
That was as far as
They
we.
used that a lot. Smaller town.
Yeah.
And I suppose everybody remembers the depots and that other little tall building, whatever that was called.
Tower.
The tower. Okay, I remember that. We used to walk uptown, and Mother would say, "Now don't mess around in the depot, and don't mess up don't bother that tower." So those were the 2 things that we could not bother. But all of that came to a close, and about when? I have it marked on here.
In the 1970s.
I suppose. But I remember that one time we got on that train. That's Alvin and I. Bought our ticket right there in Latty and rode to the World's Fair. in New York.
New York, oh, that's right.
We went all the way to New York, and that train brought us all the way back to Latty, Ohio, and we got off. I thought that was pretty nice. Of course, you talked about the meat store, and of course we know that Dale and Helen had 2 children, and the daughter married our own Dr. Miller, who is here in Paulding. So that girl is a Latty girl. We had Dr. Mausers in Latty that seemed to be very important people. But I am proud to say that Latty High School did graduate 2 black boys, and they in turn became doctors. Dr. Harley Manuel and Dr. Robert Manuel. Robert is still living in Columbus. We now have in Latty the Alco products. I think everybody knows about that.
What does the alcohol product make?
It says here they manufacture cultured marble products such as vanity tops, bathtub panels, occasional tables, window sills, bathtubs, and fluted columns, whatever that is. And it says here that Lauren Stoller is the sales manager. We've talked about the livery stable. It said Tom Finnegan was I guess he run that or something. You all might remember that, I don't. And then we can skip on over to the honey place. Oh, we need to talk something about churches in Latty too. I was surprised when you and I were doing this research that we did have a Catholic church.
Right.
Because see, I don't know about that.
It burned.
But it says here that the lightning struck the Catholic Church. There was
Latty.
in Latty, yes, there was a lot of controversy over whether that church would be in Latty or Paulding.
Yes.
Lots, I read that there was a lot of controversy over that. But for some
man gave $1,000, but
Yes.
it must be built in Latty, so they didn't dare turn it down. But later they tell me they moved that to Paulding. I don't know.
No,
They moved ours, the old church that burnt from someplace.
the Catholic Church.
no, that was built, right,
When?
1894.
I have a letter that was sent to my grandfather to ask him to help finance that church, my great-grandfather. His grandfather lost it.
That's the one in
I have it
Latty,
with me.
you mean?
The one in Latty, yes. Uh-huh.
That's why it was built there, because of the donation. That's an
I can remember in the basement of our church that burned later in 1925, that there was some of the pieces of that other church stored down in that basement, because I could always remember that, because I had to help fire that furnace over there once in a while. And of course, eventually that was the furnace that caused the fire that burned our church in December of 1925.
The furnace from the Latty Church?
No, the furnace in our church.
Oh.
But all those fixtures that they'd saved, all some of the frescoes and different things, they had stored back there. I can remember seeing a youngster there.
Well, it says here that that church, it was in May 18th, 1916. The Catholic Church in Latty was struck by lightning in the belfry at about 3 o'clock Sunday morning.
1960.
And the bolt set fire to the building and it was burned to the ground.
I was 5 years old.
They say a tramp who was taking refuge in a boxcar on the CNN Railroad saw the bolt strike and saw it set the belfry on fire. He hurried on to the railroad station and gave the alarm.
They were vulnerable in these steeples. A good example was St. Mary's there in Fort Wayne. That was great for everything else. And this, hard places to get at, and it spread so rapidly. And so I can vivid memories of those things.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting as you go down through this book that every building in Latty caught fire. Everyone. That Vogel store, it says it burned, and at the end they found the charred body of the Lloyd Vogel in there. Okay.
All right, this book here, Latty Village, 100 Years, 1881 to 1991, can be found here in the library, and it was written by Dorothy F. Chester and Mildred E. Phillips. So this is an interesting book on Latty that you can kind of move. All right.
I would just like to say too, I guess I need to give my folks credit for me being here. I was attended the high school and graduated out of Latty High School in 1938. And we as Blackfoot people were rather underprivileged, you know. You had to fight to get to the top. But I did play basketball, and I fought to get to the top, to tell you the truth. Many times in that era, there was only 2 blacks that played in the county, and that was myself in Latty and John Young in Grover Hill. And I must tell you how Alvin and I got together. You know, at that time we were riding the buses, and we would go to all these different towns, you know, and play ball. And after we reached a certain age, the girls would pair off with their boyfriends on the bus. Well, here's this little black child over here with no boyfriend. So I told Mom, I do not want to ride that bus anymore. I don't want to ride that bus anymore, Mom. She said, well, why? She said, well, I told her, I said, because all of my friends have boyfriends and they're setting with them, and I don't have anybody to set. So it worked around that I met this guy right here and talked him into taking me to the ball game. So, and when I was a junior and a senior in high school, Alvin carried me back and forth to the ball games. And in 1941, we graduated in 38, and in 41, I married Alvin. And we've lived happily ever after.
That's a nice story. All right, Dorothy. Since your name was mentioned, you want to pass it on to her?
Yes, because Ruth Alice and the Baxters and I worked on Briceton. I think they should go on. And then I'd like to be the last because I'm thinking of things that come up. So if I may, I'd rather be last.
Then let me tell you first, so we have this, so anyone viewing our video can come in the library and see this book on Briceton. It was the centennial, which was 1882 to 1902.
1982.
1982, yes.
100 years.
Oh, that has to be 100 years. And this was written by...
That was a community project. Ruth Alice was in charge, and Edith there did a lot of the work, typing, a lot of hard work. Some of the rest of us contributed a little.
All right. All right, Ruth Alice, we'll let you talk about Briceton.
Perhaps I was interested in Briceton all my life because my grandparents came to Briceton in 1882. My grandfather had come from Germany and lived in Sandusky, and he read an ad where they wanted people to come for the lunch. Anyway, they came, and he and my grandmother came to Briceton, and he worked about 3 years, I guess, in the sawmill, and then he bought a farm.
Problem.
Now it's recording.
Can you back this up?
Well, it stopped recording.
Yeah, but she's been flipped in the middle 2 times.
Well, it stopped. See?
All right, should she start from the very beginning
Yes.
then? Would that's where you want her to
Mhm.
go?
Yes, please.
All right,
We'll
we'll have you
start
start
there.
all at the beginning. See, what, later on, we're going to be able to edit these. And we want to combine everything together, so we might have some little rough edges here and there, but it won't when we put them together again. All right.
I think I've been interested in Briceton, of course, all my life, since my grandfather came there in 1882, and that's the year that Briceton was formed. And of course, we have a green elevator there later. My grandfather came to Briceton because he had read of an ad in the paper wanting people to work in the sawmill. And Grandpa, I guess, was good at majoring lumber, so he came and got the job. He worked there about 3 years, and then he bought a farm, about 40 acres, it was about 2.5 miles south of Briceton, and lived there then until he retired and came to Paulding. My uncle, who was born in 1882 at the same time Briceton was formed, had many interesting stories to tell. He went to a Lutheran school out south of Briceton. They had at first when they went, they went in an old home and had the school. And he told of how the first day they had all German lessons, and then I guess the second day they started. They had German in the morning and English in the afternoon. And he was telling the benches and the table were of 3 boards about 60 feet long, no backs to them. The children, the boys sat on one side of the table and the girls sat on the other. And he was telling how of a boy threw a spitball at a girl and missed and hit the teacher. And of course the teacher retaliated by had a 3-foot pole, I guess, or a stick. And he started after the boy, and he missed the boy again. So the kids had a good time over that. Then they had Briceton. They had several ball teams. I remember because my uncle played on one of the teams. They had Gilbert told me tell of the band. They had a band and a bandstand. And my dad didn't play in the band, but he always played the accordion, and he could just hear a tune, just like the fellas, I think, hear a tune and play it. So we went to go to house dances, and the kids would go upstairs and play and dance, and the adults would be downstairs dancing to this band. Briceton, it said that I have a directory here, and it said in 1900 Briceton had 280 people, and it tells of the Ridenour store, which shows a variety of things that they sold. They had agricultural implements, they had books and shoes, cigars, tobacco, dry goods, groceries, and provisions, of other provisions. So you see, it was a general store, and it told how the women would bring in their eggs and milk and trade them for merchandise. They also had a McGee store, which sold books and shoes and cigars and tobacco, dry goods, groceries, and other provisions and hardware. And then another store had sold cigars, tobacco, wines, and liquors. And I know there were 3 saloons, they told at one time in the store. They told, and they also had 2 different hotels. The elevator tells there was an elevator there at the time and a coal dealer. And then I think the Marquis bought out the elevator, and then my grandfather, or Charles's father, then bought the elevator later. Let's see. My uncle was telling about the church, that they would have the Christmas tree, of course, with the candles on them, and so that was he was one of them that watched the candles, stood by the Christmas tree in case of fire. And he was also the janitor, he said, and he rang the bell for the church, and he worked at the hitching post. I suppose he helped to tie the horses up as they came to church. But then my mother's folks, the Mosleys, came to Paulding. You want me to tell about this too? It's out of Briceton, but I came to Paulding in 1856 and bought land. And he was the same man that they contacted to help finance the Catholic Church at Latty. The farm has remained in our family until the present day. They built the Grange Hall on that, and as I said before, the Grange, as long as it continued to be a Grange, after continued to be a Grange, it would go back to the family. So the old Grange Hall is in our family again. And by coincidence, my father came from 2.5 miles south of Briceton up to where my mother lived, 2 miles west of Paulding, when they were dating. And when my husband and I were dating, the Buellers had bought my grandfather's farm. So Charles came from the same location to see me because I was living 2 miles west of Paulding. So we had the same route. Of course, my father came by buggy, horse and buggy, and Charles had a new convertible, Chevrolet convertible. Then the Klingers, who were my mother's side of the family, lived just near there, and they helped build the St. Paul Church that's on the creek just on Briceton Road on 87. And my grandfather Dankelson helped build the Briceton Church, which was, I suppose he helped build the first one, which was, what date was that? Do you remember the other?
1887.
1887.
The first one was built.
Mm-hmm. And then he and my father helped build the second one after the first one burned. So they helped build both churches.
Ralph Ryder, who helped, the one that is there now was built in 1915, finished and completed in 1915. Ralph Ryder, who worked on it originally, is still living. He lives in Fort Lauderdale.
That's right. And I understand there was an All Saints Church in Briceton, and I believe was there a Church of God or something was another. There were 3 churches at one time in Briceton. So it was quite a popular town.
There was a story about that, seeing the other church in town. I was talking to Bert Davis one time, and he was telling me, he was telling us, he and I went over to visit him, of a story that somebody had gone to a Lutheran church, and there wasn't enough, what would you call it, spiritual awakening in the Lutheran church, so they went to the other one. It was much more.
That's that All Saints Church, huh?
She was telling about the hitching rack. Here's a picture of the original church. It shows the hitching rack along the north side of the church. This, by the way, is the centennial for the church, 1886 to 1996. The book was put up. And the teacher that she was talking about that got hit with a spitball is Mr. Sutter. Pastor Sutter at that time. He was also pastor of the church.
This is the only church in the state of Ohio that is owned by the township trustees.
That's
The St. Paul Church.
St. Paul.
Yeah.
Yes. And of course the school is still there too. My mother went to the Haynes School. I understand it was just across the first school was across the road from the Grange Hall or Caddy Corner Barnhart. And I don't know if it burned or what, but anyway, then they built the Haynes School, and I think that it was, usually they named it after the people who owned the land. So this was the son-in-law of Mr. Haynes, the son-in-law of Barnhouse.
You're talking about the Briceton first school, the Briceton school?
Yeah, where was the Leslie School?
Well, I don't know, but it was moved. It was moved to Pete Bushman's property out here.
It was a-
And I don't know what happened.
That was a big two-story.
That was a two-story,
That
that
was
was
a
a
two-story
story.
that involved
Yeah, it was
Bryson, that was limited.
The two-story, it's on the front.
Yeah, that was
Yeah,
one.
that's news to me.
And then the second, this had all 8th grades, of course, and the second school was divided. They had 2 rooms. That was unusual, wasn't it, for a school at
Yes,
that time, to have 2 rooms?
Mhm.
The little building that stands on the corner there at Briceton is,
That's the second.
This is, of course, you can
This
see.
is the first
This is
one.
a picture of the first one was there.
oh, okay.
Town of Briceton was laid out by my great-grandfather, George Leslie. We have one of the layouts of the town of Briceton, and it was taken from his land and his son's land, right there on the corner. Briceton was originally called Leslie Corners. And they tried to get it named, what was the other name for it? It just didn't work. They finally settled on Briceton, and that stuck, because if I understand, Bryce was an engineer on the railroad.
He built the railroad.
And he built the railroad, and that's where Briceton got its name. Note here that the New York, Chicago, and St. Louis Railroad, which is what it was called originally, was laid in 1882. Well,
That's what opened up Briceton, the railroad opened up the community.
Briceton was a big community too, with these sawmill activities, and my mother used to tell about go to Briceton every Saturday night, like we used to come to Paulding every Saturday night. And she remembered they had a big get-together in Briceton one time, and Ellie Tote bought a full stalk of bananas. He said all the kids had a treat. Everybody ate bananas in Briceton.
And they tell about that big tree on a half mile
Yeah.
west of Briceton that a man lived in. I think it was about 5 feet long, and it was high enough to, the diameter was high enough to stand in. And he and his family lived there, and I guess later they built a little addition onto it, but I know in the Black Swamp that they have the VCR, the Rolling Green. It tells about that. They didn't know where it was or what it was, but
First tree house in Paulding.
I guess it was.
That was in Briceton?
In Briceton,
Briceton.
or west of Briceton.
Uh-huh.
You find a lot of the original names of Briceton are buried in the St. Paul Cemetery. You've got history from those people there, you'll find it. That's about the history of Briceton.
About a mile west of Briceton, where Lord Klopfenstein lived, there was a Paulus, that these other Pauluses are related to. And he had a funeral home, undertaking parlor it was called at that time, and that was on Lord Klopfenstein's farm.
I see, I have a note here too, that the Briceton School, the last year of Briceton School was in 1933. So it's been, Philo Martin was the teacher.
Was that sure wasn't a period of consolidation of schools at that time. Where did the students go from Briceton then? They went to Latty.
And
Every
you
2
walked.
miles.
You walked. There was no school bus at that time.
You did not have to walk more than 2 miles though.
Oh, yes, I walked 4 miles to Latty.
You did?
I
thought it was
lived
2
a mile and a half south of Broughton Church, and I walked. My last year, I got to ride the bus.
I never did think you guys
It's
would walk more than 2
amazing.
miles.
Remember that?
Town.
The Latty Town Hall was one of the first schools.
Yes, it was one of the older buildings. The Latty Town Hall, as it stands today, was the first school, and it stood right west on what is now the McDonald Pike. Judge Latty owned that farm, and then when they built the new building, he gave the town the old school building to be moved and used for a town hall. And by the way, Judge Latty, his home was, when he lived here, was this old house back here, and his first wife and daughter were buried right back in here in about 1916 or 17. They were taken up and put a mausoleum at Defiance.
Well, the reason I said what I did, because if I would have lived at the Grange Hall, or farther west of the Grange Hall, I was going to Haynes School.
Paulding, yeah, but then
But as
Paulding.
it was, I was that close to the boundary line that I went to Paulding School, graduated from Paulding School.
In Latty, Dade was a smaller community than what Broughton was at the time, Broughton and Briceton. But they furnished I mentioned once before when we had talked to Blue Creek, they had a team and a horse-drawn hack, I guess you'd call it. The curtains rolled down, you know, on bad weather, you could roll it down, and it came into Latty. Bess Emerson, whatever, drove there may be a picture of that, I don't remember whether we put one in the book or not.
I'm thinking that I spent my
They were
first or second grade at the Latty Town Hall.
They were the only ones that got to ride, the rest of us walked, the Briceton and...
Now, how about in the winter time?
And you walked. And it would be so cold. This Helen Mace was a nurse out here. She would come from, of course, I come down south of Broughton. She lived in Broughton. And we'd come down what is now 613. And there was an old brick school building, and the front had blown out. We'd had a wind that blown out. We'd go in there and you'd clap your hands and dance around to get warm. And the slaughters would come out and we'd go and we'd sing songs and till we get to Latty, and by the time you got there, your lunch was froze stiff in the winter time.
The reason I said that was a lot of people had mud boats in the winter time.
Mhm.
And that's what they went back and forth to town. I know my folks had a mud boat, and
Delbert, do you remember when the Latty kids had to go to the town hall? You know what was taking place at the Latty school? They were building the science room and the home ec room.
Yeah, I remember, I didn't have to go up there. I was in the class that got this ticket.
Oh, well, I was like in the first or second grade, and I know that we were up there with Laura Scoffer as our teacher.
Our first school bus was a little green, narrow bus. It only held just a few, you know.
got on
That
the
was
back.
my senior year. I rode 1 year. And I walked 6 miles. We had normal school here. I walked 6 miles morning and night to come here to normal school.
And now people
A few years ago.
walk across town. They have the bus pick them up on the west side of town.
At the door, the bus stop's almost at the door there in Latty. All they have to do is walk up the door and get on the bus.
We found people wouldn't, walk down the street to come into the library. They couldn't park right out in front. And that's why we developed a parking lot in the back here. So, people today just don't realize how it was just back 50, 60 years ago.
Imagine without a cafeteria or anything in your lunch, what it'd be like after you packed it that far. It was froze stiff. The Latty school was heated by steam. They had radiators, and you could, you had a metal, and you didn't have too many paper bags back at that time because you raised your food. And you'd set that on the radiator to get your sandwiches and things thawed out to have to eat by the time it come noon.
Well, most of the schools had a pot-bellied stove.
Yeah, the
They would
older
have
school,
put
Broughton,
their
yeah,
soup
they
and
have
so
the
forth on top
furnace.
for the children's meal. Maybe
I'm
bring a
sorry.
vegetable or something and put it in the pot. That would be their meal. And we didn't have any gym either, Delbert, at Paulding School when I was in
Oh,
school. We had our armory was our place where we played basketball.
Latty's first gym was Lutheran Church in Broughton, and the sanctuary was where they played, and then you had what little space was left. People stood up to watch the games. That was Latty's first basketball court, and that was. I was in high school when that was used at that purpose. I think we're going to be cutting. I better keep still.
I guess that's all I
All right, Norm, what would you like to add?
Well, I'm gonna just take it from the time we arrived in Paulding.
All right.
And that was in 1914. My dad was transferred from Rockford, Ohio, where I was born, as railroad agent. And there was a lot of activity around that railway station because they were released 3 draymen that hauled freight out of there, and they had American Railway Express operated by Curtis Wood. And all the merchandise and everything came in by rail. And we had delivery stables in those days. Going down the streets here, I can remember these buildings, and the grocery stores, the meat markets, the barber shops, and in 1894, there have been so many burnouts, burnout coal blocks, all wooden buildings, and the council established a ruling ordinance that every new building that went up had to be of masonry or brick block or something like that. So that's the reason why we have so many different types of buildings up there. And all of them were practically built to house either an office or a rental or living up there. And most of our attorneys, doctors, and dentists, all that were up in those buildings. We have brick streets, and on most of our main thoroughfares. Now, Water Street in front of the school was mud, dirt. Jefferson Street, and most all these cross streets in the alleys, you didn't see a paved alley in town. So in the fall or the spring of the year and fall of the year, when some of it was impossible, the automobiles, when it came up to the automobile time, they either put them up on jacks, and most of the people that would have an automobile would be a doctor, the veterinarian, and sheriff, people like that. The rest of them either put them into these rental garages where they had spaces where they rented for the year and left their cars. And when they did have to go in an emergency, your car was always warm to go. And that was the Armory Auto Company, which was operated, built by Gilbert Barnes, and then he subleased this to W.H. Cullen, and he was one of the first ones I knew of that had automobiles for sale, and was Chrysler or Dodge products at that time. And of course, in the Armory, of course, that was built in 1911, the year of my birth, and then the Farmers Bank. We had 2 banks at that time, the National Bank at the same location where the health department is now, and then the Farmers Bank, and it operated through the Depression, and when the banks failed, it was one of the banks that paid off 100%. And G.C. Dittenhavers had a real estate office right next to the bank, and then we had Hardesty and Cutter's grocery store on that site, and that's where I met my wife. And we had at home in those days, you had to go to town for your groceries. About every day you had to go for something, because you didn't have the refrigeration and things like that. So I think I had to go up and get beans or something like that. Well, anyway, there I met that beautiful little blonde girl, and I walked her up as far a block from my house, and then I said, well, I've got to go on the other side of the street. I was afraid somebody in the family would see me with that little lady. So we always had chores to do, especially we had chickens, and we ate. One year we raised some pigs, and of course that was one of my chores because I was the youngest boy in the family. I received a lot of the chores, and when they had the stoves are burning, of course, you had to empty those ashes every morning. You had to have that coal in before you go to school. Of course, school was across the street. That's no problem. Sometimes it was too close. And I can remember a lot of the faculty, Judge Finley, I think was the superintendent of the schools at that time. And Wayne Huffman was here too, one of the gentlemen at that time. Later on we had O.W. Buchanan, and May Cheater, and a lot of the group that you probably remember. But, a lot of activities, you know, in the wintertime, we made our own activities for children growing up. In the wintertime, we had what we called Straw's Hill.